All right. Hi, everyone. Good evening, and thank you, Kevin, for having me. And my name is Anina Major, and it has been a wild ride since 2017. But I'll say a little bit about my practice. I primarily work with sculpture and do installations. Sometimes I do performance or time-based videos to enhance those installations. It often references tropical ecologies or historical or contemporary ethnography. Um, and a lot of this comes from my decision many, many years ago to reestablish a home that was contrary to the place that I grew up. So I live here in the United States and I was born and raised in the Bahamas. And I find that navigating life just in general, as I kind of encapsulate experiences, I'm often referring back to those moments. And so I like to think of my practice as an investigation into what does self mean in relation to place, as this kind of site of negotiation. Um, yeah. And so I've had a lot of shows. I'm always showing. The most recent has been the Triennial at El Museo Barrio in New York. And I have a few shows coming up uh, in the new year. I don't want to speak on them too soon, but when they just, follow me on Instagram, you'll find out. But I'm working on a few institutional engagements that will appear next year. So I'm really excited about those. Yeah.
Nina, thank you so much, and for both you and for Sam, the generosity of being involved tonight. So thank you again, Sam.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you, Kevin, for inviting me to be here. I'm excited to talk to RISD students and alums. I'll give you kind of the quick rundown of my past, 25 years since graduating from the printmaking department. As Kevin said, I have a BFA. And so, yeah, I graduated 2001 with a printmaking degree, and the day after graduation, I think I was on a bus to New York with plans to get a studio here and start an art practice and see what happened. And I kind of had in the back of my head that I would move to New York for a year, and then I was going to try to go to Berlin. That was my goal, was to end up in Berlin as an artist. I'd spent a semester at RISD in Berlin and really loved it there. But I moved to New York. I got my first cell phone that summer. And I remember I was on the bus to New York when I got a phone call from David Zwirner Gallery, who I had faxed my resume to, having worked at the
Facts.
museum. Yeah, I had faxed my resume to a bunch of galleries in New York, having worked at the RISD Museum for a couple of years in the conservation department. I figured, okay, what skills do I have? Outside of printmaking and drawing that I can market. And so I figured, well, the museum experience gave me some art handling kind of preparator experience. So I faxed a bunch of galleries. David Zwirner's gallery called and said, can you come in tomorrow? We're deinstalling a Jason Rhodes show and we need an extra set of hands. So that was sort of the start of my summer of 2001 working at, I think I worked at 5 or 6 different galleries on a freelance basis. Of course, 9/11 happened shortly after that. And kind of everything closed in New York. And it was strangely at the same time that all of my work fell through and I was really struggling. It also really solidified my love of being in New York. And the Berlin plan kind of went by the wayside, and I committed to making a life here. So I got a studio. I started making my work. I started showing my work a little bit. As much as a 21-year-old with a BFA can get their foot in the door with galleries, which I'm sure is a lot of what we'll talk about here. But I also was, looking for work, looking for jobs. I worked a lot of different jobs and landed a full-time job, strangely in the fashion industry. And during that time that I was working, some friends of mine and I, my co-director here, Rob Holt, who is also in my class at RISD, we decided to open a gallery in Williamsburg. And it was kind of a joke when we started it. We thought like, oh, there's a really cheap storefront in Williamsburg. We'll each pitch in some money and do some shows with our friends, and we'll give it a stupid name like Klaus von Nixhagen Gallery. It won't last very long. And 20 years later, it's my full-time gig, and we've done hundreds and hundreds of shows, and we've moved to 3 different locations. We're now located in Tribeca, which is a real gallery neighborhood here. So we're really kind of in the mix and part of a whole community. So that's my trajectory in a nutshell.
A fabulous trajectory, and again, congratulations on 20 years with the gallery, because that's quite a feat. Both of you, in giving your bios, talked about leaving RISD and then, those initial goals as an artist, for both of you, and then also what jobs you took on that got you by. But for those attending, whether they are a student or an alum seeking, they're getting their work out there for the first time, what is the best way coming right out of school to start to get a sense of this ecosystem of the gallery world, exhibition world? Doesn't it? It could also be institutions, galleries, nonprofits to show your work, et cetera. So.
I can address that a little bit. And I mean, like I said, when I graduated, I really was I was very worried about what I was going to do for work. I knew I wanted to be in New York for a while. I knew I wanted to be an artist, but I knew that I wasn't going to, suddenly have some kind of art career that was going to support me. And so I really did think about what skills I had. And the thing that stood out to me was that I had worked during my time at RISD at the museum. And I thought, okay, how does that translate? I also did an internship at PS1 the summer before I graduated. So I had lived in New York, and I had kind of made some friends and, who were fellow interns at PS1, a few curators at PS1 who I connected with. And so I kind of had a sense that that I could kind of jump into the art world. But the truth of it was that I wasn't going to jump in as an artist. I was going to jump in as a worker, which I thought was, really like the idea of the day job was really important to me. I also did get a studio pretty quickly in New York, and I shared it with 3 other RISD graduates who we all moved together. And so we were spending all day working day jobs and all night in our studio, and then going out for beers and doing whatever. But we were kind of 24/7 living the life, doing what we could to get a foothold.
Right. And when younger artists or emerging artists approach your gallery, how best to approach you? Like, because it's often like, don't go right to the gallery owner, or there's lots of issues. Don't email them, don't call them. So how do people communicate? Because there's so many different, I don't know, scenarios that are out there that are sometimes even contradictory to each other. So yeah.
Sure. I mean, I do think that, it's a very, the days of kind of, sending your work to a gallery and having them look at it and say, yes, I'd like to show this, those days are kind of gone. I think they were gone a long time ago. That doesn't mean that people don't still try to do it that way. And I have to say, we have, a catch-all gallery email address that gets thousands and thousands of cold emails with people's portfolios attached to them. And it would be wonderful if we could give them all time and take a look, and I'm sure there's really good stuff in there, but we delete every single one of them without looking. Like, it's just not, we're a small team, and I think even a big team gallery just does not have the time to spend. It's also very, it's like, I think in the age of social media and email blasting, there's not a lot of thought necessarily going into that process. So I always think the best way to get to know a gallery and for them to get to know you is to show up, see the shows, talk to whoever is sitting at the front desk, which sometimes is somebody straight out of art school who
Right.
is doing their day job, and maybe they're going to become your friend. Or it's me, you know, the gallery owner sitting there, and we could have an interesting conversation too. So I always think it's better to get to know each other as people first, instead of as like professional, like, what are you going to do for me? What am I going to do for you?
Right.
I don't know. I didn't go into this business to have that kind of transactional
Right.
relationship. And I do feel like building relationships really is about conversation and showing up. And, you know,
Mhm.
somebody coming to every single show at our gallery for 6 months, I'm going to take notice of who they are, at least.
Right. And Anina, for you, graduating in 2017, how did you gain your first opportunities to show your work outside of RISD?
Honestly, it came through RISD in a
Oh,
very roundabout way. Like I
mhm.
did the portfolio reviews
Yep.
and maintain relationships from those. Um, but I want to touch on a few things that Sam said, and I want to
Yep.
thank him for being so transparent because not everybody is like that. I've actually never done a cold call, but I have friends who have, and I just don't think that that's a informed way of
Mhm.
approaching someone, you know, not in this day and age. And um, I'm a big fan of doing research. I mean, Google is our best friend. The internet is there now. And I'm a big fan of doing research. And, you know, what's presented is one thing, but what you find out about a gallery, its program, its artist, what their
Mhm.
interests are, you know, is sometimes another thing, you know, and sometimes that requires a little bit more time and a little bit more insight. So a lot of my opportunities, again, have come from relationships that I've developed. After grad school, I kind of went and committed to a residency tour.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's the best way I could put it. And I kind of floated from place to place. I mean, I was not in a place where I could afford to get like a place of my own or anything like that. But I did know like there were residency programs that provided housing. So I kind of positioned myself, like put everything in storage and committed to hopping around. And while I was doing that for 2 years, it was really about one, the application hustle, but two, like when I got an opportunity, even if it wasn't my number one opportunity, making
Mhm.
the best of it, making the best of the people who I met at those residencies.
Mhm.
And right behind making work was making friends and meeting new people, um, and creating friendships that I still have today. So
Mhm.
that's really how I ended up getting my first opportunity to show. Um, And I still end up getting those opportunities that way. It's always like, oh, a friend of mine, a friend of that saw this and da 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 da. And it
Right.
always kind of just like a chain reaction. And so I can't stress that enough. You know, focusing on building relationships
Mhm.
pays off in the long run. Not so much transactions,
Right.
you know, like what this could do for me or whatever, but more so like, you know, what are the things we have in common? Is this a space that understands my pedagogy? Are we
Mhm.
philosophically on the same wavelength? Do we work? Does the way that I work as an artist align with the way that I see this particular institution showing or the kind of work that they show? Like these are really important questions because when you get asked to do something
Mhm.
and it's presented as like the moment in your career, if you have no idea where you are
Right.
morally, ethically, philosophically, then those become really, really hard decisions to make. And I feel like knowing that about yourself and doing the research and seeing the history of an organization and institution really helps you to understand if you align in that way and if that's a relationship you want to nurture.
Yeah. Sam, on that note, do you, I mean, a gallery is always looking for work that aligns with who they show, and they show, you've had hundreds of shows, as you said. What are some characteristics you look for in your artist relationships that you've developed?
Yeah. Well, I think I want to comment on something Anina said, which is this kind of building relationships. I think also maintaining those relationships is really important. I mean, I always think about RISD is like,
Mhm.
RISD just like hands you this group of people who you're really intensely connected to for a really long time. And they become formative, important relationships. And I think one thing that I always feel really helped me was when I moved to New York, I did move here with a lot of people from RISD, and they were my friend. I mean, they still are my friends in a lot of ways, but they were kind of like my core pack of people that I operated with, I moved around with. But I also was, you know, when I was pursuing an artist career, I made sure that I was always making work and that those friends of mine knew about that work. Because that was really important, that we were visiting each other's studios and having not just like a friend hangout conversation, but actually having a professional conversation too about like, oh, this is really interesting what you're working on. Because then, like Anina said, opportunities come from that, where one person might get invited to do something, and whoever invited them to have that opportunity might say, do you know anybody else who
Right.
is working in a way that you're really into? And that's, I mean, as a gallerist, that is the best way for me to find out about work, is if an artist that I already know and respect says, you should look at this, it's really good. I already trust them, and I already like their work, and I already respect what they're doing. So when they tell me to look at something, it means, 1,000% more than just somebody saying like, will you look at my work? And I think that there's a difference between, like, I feel like it can be very discouraging to hear like about networking. And I really hate the idea of networking because it sounds like, I mean, we all went into the arts to avoid networking, like to avoid this like corporate speak of,
Yeah.
like how to get ahead, how to climb the ladder, blah, blah, blah. But the relationships are, that is what networking is. It's like, talking to people and finding out what they're interested in and telling them what you're interested in and finding out what your overlap is. So for me, there's no like type of art that I'm looking for. There's no hole that I'm trying to fill in our program. We're not a gallery that says like, oh, we need this kind of work to show next. We really follow our nose, and there are three of us that run the gallery together. So the three of us are all out there seeing shows constantly, doing studio visits constantly. We're kind of like on the ground, and then we come back together and we talk about what we like, and we try to convince each other to like the same thing, which sometimes works out, and sometimes it leads to a relationship with the gallery, and sometimes it stays in our individual lives. Um, but but really finding art through other artists is really important to me. So when Anina talks about those relationships that started from RISD and kind of grew, I think residencies are also a great way to meet other artists who you're going to share things in common with. That's really the key.
So kind of related to something you mentioned earlier, a question came through from one of the attendees about the coming to the shows, maybe seeing you, maybe seeing, a gallery assistant. And they said, the question is, what would that conversation look like? Any thoughts, again, on those kind of interactions that really spark your interest, either from the gallery assistant or if you were behind the desk and someone was asking you certain questions?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, for one thing, we put a lot of work into the shows we put on here. It's our jobs. It's what pays our bills. It's like what we pour our heart and souls into. So the most important thing to me is that people are looking at what we're doing and kind of noticing what we're doing. And that doesn't mean you have to like what we're doing all the time, but I find the best conversations, and I love sitting at the front desk and talking to people. I'm usually up there because I like to have those conversations. And I think the most important thing to me for starting a conversation is telling me what you think about what you just saw, because we spent, maybe years working on what's hanging in the gallery. So to know that somebody paid attention to that is very meaningful. And then, if you say something smart and interesting that catches my interest, I might wonder who you are. And it might not go any farther than that the first
Right.
time you come in, but definitely there are people who have been coming in here month after month, year after year, and I know them super, super well. And I go to their studios and I take an interest in what they do because they take an interest in what we do.
And Nina, for the residencies that played like you said, you did a residency tour. Are there some residencies that were especially just wonderful? You're like, oh, I wish more RISD people would know about these residencies because one, it was such a great environment to make my work, but also they really fostered a lot of interaction with others there.
Can I say one point to Sam's point?
Yeah,
Because I
of
actually
course.
was that person that once like went in and spoke to the gallery person. I'll be honest, I don't really do that. I don't have that much time to always go to a show. But what I will say is that when I do go to a show, I am genuinely interested in the work and I'm not just going. So like we're talking about these conversations. I think it's really important to stress that people can tell when you're BSing. And so you really need to be genuine. Like if you don't really look at this kind of work or not interested in this kind of work, like don't come in and try to like talk about it just because you know it's up. Like really be genuine about the conversations that you're starting. And so I did do that once and I still have that relationship with that gallery. I don't actually necessarily show at that gallery. They have done studio visits. But when I think about the times where I've been in situations where I've met gallery owners, and we've talked about my work or artists that they show, and I've not shown with them, I still value those relationships because, maybe it's not me showing with their program, but knowing that they are supporting my practice, and trust me, everybody talking, like whether you know it or not, I feel like are also valuable relationships. So I just wanted to make that point about like being genuine and a gallery owner can love your work, own your work actually, and you may never ever show at that gallery, right? But that doesn't mean that like you don't have a meaningful relationship with that gallery. And so I think focusing on genuine interactions that are actually of interest to you will take you down the best path. So I guess to transition that into the residencies, honestly, I can't say there's a residency that wasn't beneficial. And I know that we have the most popular ones, right? And I've done a few of those, but I don't know if I could say that they were so much better than another one. And I say that because when you choose a residency, I think that your circumstance is important. Like how is this going to benefit your practice or even your personal well-being is really important. You know, some residencies require other, that you have your own living facilities or, some of them provide it. And so you have to really have a good gauge on what you need and whether that residency is going to fulfill that need for the time that you're in. And the ones that I've gone on have fulfilled the needs that I had at this specific time. So I find them to be very useful in that way. All residencies have something to offer. When you're applying, you should be very clear on what it's offering and whether that's something you can utilize. And I think it varies. Like I did my first residency wasn't a very popular one in the contemporary art world, but I was still working through a body of work with ceramic work that I needed facilities. And so contemporary art residencies weren't necessarily providing that. And I knew that I just needed to make work. So my first residency out of grad school was literally like in the middle of Weston, far west New York, Rochester. And it was popular within the pottery world, but not necessarily within contemporary art. And here I was making sculpture, but it provided facilities for me, which was the number one thing at the time. that
Mhm.
I needed. And it also provided a way for me to um, make money because I
Mhm.
got to teach classes with my skills. So I was like honing my skills, but then also like making work, and I had access to facilities I could use. And then that opportunity with that work built for me to be able to apply to even more competitive residencies that quite frankly, one of them didn't even have facilities for me to make my work, but I
Mhm.
got accepted. And so it was then, well, do I need facilities at this point? Well, I didn't need them at that residency. I needed something else. And so it's really about understanding like yourself and what you need and what you want, and then trying to align that with what the residency is offering. Um, and taking advantage of it. I mean, I meant to, whenever I was in a new town, I went to all of the openings.
Mhm.
Residencies want you to go to different art functions within the town. You go,
Right.
you meet people. Like,
Right.
you just be open to, you have to be open to what's presented in front of you, even though it doesn't look like what you think you want right now. Like, you just have to be open to it. It doesn't mean sign up for it
Mhm.
for life, but you do have to like be open to those experiences and what they may bring forth. You just never know.
When we've talked about relationship building, conversations being genuine, even how residencies can play that role. For you, Sam and Anina, are there other networks that are important in this mix to get connected to exhibition opportunities outside the ones we've been talking about?
Mm.
I mean, I think about, um, I mean, my experience is so New York focused, uh,
Mhm.
so I can really only speak to the fact that there are a million things that you could be
Yeah.
doing with your time at any
Yeah.
given moment in New York City. And I think showing up and going to see shows, and having a friend that you go to openings with, or go to openings by yourself, or
Mhm.
talk to somebody interesting at the cafe in the neighborhood that you live in, and kind
Mhm.
of just build these artist friendships to build an artist community. And I think residencies are a fabulous way to build an artist community. I think art school is
Right.
Yeah.
a fabulous way to
Right.
start an artist community. But it takes work. I mean, it takes work to continue that after school,
Yeah.
because no one is getting paid to go to your studio and give you a credit,
Right.
and your friends are not forced to sit through 6-hour crits and take your
Mhm.
work seriously. You have
Right.
to kind of have to stand up and show up and do the work that is going to interest, that's going to be fun to talk about and fun to have people relate to. Um,
Mhm.
and I think that there are ways, there are sort of more official channels. I mean, I know in New York there's a lot of, and I think that, with the internet and Zoom and all of this, there's a lot of like Crit Club and different kind of online critique groups that sometimes cost money and sometimes don't. And
Right.
I think that whatever way you can find your community and find people to talk with about your work, it's really step one. But
Yeah.
it's a step that you have to maintain. It's a step that you can't just take for granted, because
Right. Bop in and bop out of and think you're not
Yeah.
using that community. And yeah.
yeah, you've got to use it, and you can't be lazy about it. I
Yeah.
think artists are really um, hungry, motivated
Mhm.
people, and you need to show that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think back to I don't really have time to do it now, but I think back to
Mhm.
before I went to grad school, I used to take classes and things for no reason,
Mhm.
just to like learn something new or to like practice something that I don't necessarily employ in the studio. Um, so outside of like, taking that with a friend, you know what I mean? It's like, again, it's like, how do you build relationships, right? Like, I used to play sports a lot. So, like, my sport teammates were like, we practice every week. So this idea of like taking a class with a friend, another artist friend, or someone who works in the art industry, it's like again nurturing the relationships and engaging in activity. And then sometimes we do things that are not art related. We just go for walks or and whatnot. But yeah, I guess the easiest thing I would say is think back to like well, how do you stay friends with your friends now? Like, you know what I mean? Like, how do you stay friends with your friends now? And
It's
think
work.
about right, and think
Yeah.
about how to do that. Um, yeah.
But switching gears a little bit, when I was graduating, I had several exhibition opportunities which were great, and I met a very good gallerist who really liked said, "I like your work. I'd like to give you a show." Oh my goodness, but I'm not going to give you a show until you make this many more pieces. And I was like, oh, and you're just getting out of school, and it just felt like, how am I going to do this time-wise and all? What are your thoughts on that? It's almost like ripe fruit. Are you ready coming out of school with enough work, a body of work, that the work is evolved or matured? How do you see that, Anina, from the artist point of view, and Sam, how do you see it from the gallery point of view?
Well, I will say that the work I'm making now is the work I thought I was gonna make in grad school. I mean, I'm just being honest. Like the work that I make now is like when people are like, "Oh, that's amazing." I'm like, "Oh, that's really what I was actually trying to make in grad school." Like, and I'm
Yeah.
finally made it. Um, I don't think of it in quantitative ways as like you need to have this much work.
Mhm.
For me, I don't think about it in that way. I think about it more. So the way I view my practice is somewhat athletic in the sense that I'm disciplined and I train in a particular way.
Mhm.
And that means like when I say I'm dedicating a certain amount of time to studio work in that day, I make sure it's the most efficient use of that time. And for me, that has led to I never really had a conversation about whether I have enough work
Mhm.
because I'm doing this in a very like training way so that
Mhm.
I can continue to push forward and experiment and explore different things. And that has served me up until this point. So there's always work. Like, and to me, work begets work. Like I leave the studio like, oh, I should try that tomorrow. Or like this is this. And then, so I know that about myself. And when I enter the studio, so I stay disciplined and that I don't allow things to interrupt the committed time I have. And that has kind of led to being able to fill, I guess, the need. Timing doesn't always work out. That's
Mhm.
something that I negotiate, you know, as far as like when would be the best time to do the show.
Right.
But as far as the work, I know it's going to be there because I have this kind of discipline about like the time that I spend in that space.
It's interesting. I tell so many people that are starting out, protect that time at all costs,
All
like,
costs, all
yeah,
costs.
because it will be punctured constantly, and you got to
That is so
protect that.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Sam, your thought from the gallery side of things.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin, it kind of kills me to hear that whoever that gallerist was told you like you need to make more of this before,
Yeah.
because I always think like more of, I don't know, more of what? Like more of uh 12 more of these paintings,
Right.
because every I always think of an artist practice as constantly developing and changing, and I think of
Mhm.
artists kind of like scientists trying to figure something out, and every question leads to another question. So um, it made me think actually about how 20 years ago when we started the gallery, and I was 25 years old and a working artist myself,
Mhm.
there was like a certain ease to doing a studio visit where it was just sort of like, hey, come over to my studio and we'll talk about stuff, and nobody really like took my point of view as any kind of authoritative anything.
Mhm.
And I loved that because we could really have a very open conversation about
Right.
the work, and a lot of it had to do with like, oh, you're doing this, like where is it going, like how do you think about your practice, how do you, it wasn't so much like show me what you do and I'll decide whether or not to show it.
Mhm.
It's much more conversational, and sometimes it brings me down these days to like realize that there's a certain expectation or power dynamic that I'm not into at all, where it's like somebody invites you to their studio and they want you to you know say like, yes, this is good, and I'm going to show it in my gallery, which almost, I mean, it really almost never happens that way. It's such a um, I think of um, professional artists as really showing you their work in the best light, but they're really showing you their practice and the way they think. So I feel like, yeah, it's discouraging to me to hear like, oh, make more of these and then we'll talk. Because it seems like a lot of it is just kind of the artists that I show are the ones who I think have this kind of long-term way of thinking that is going to change and develop. And we do shows with artists that people say like, oh, this is totally different from what they were doing 5 years ago. And I love that process of it. It made me think also that I feel like you should never wait for somebody to tell you that you have permission to have a show or something like that. I think, you know, as somebody who just kind of did it ourselves, like we when we opened our gallery, we had no long-term plans, but we said, we know all these great artists. We love their work. We have a really cheap storefront in Williamsburg. Let's show them, like, let's do the show that nobody else is doing. And the artists that we worked with to do those, it was very collaborative, and it felt like, oh, no one else is doing this, so why don't we do it? And I think that's the best way, especially like, you know, if you're super young getting out of your BFA or something, like just do it yourself. Do a show in your living room, like get a bunch of friends together, someone, you know, before they move into their apartment, like hang a bunch of work on the walls and have a party. It's much more.
I love that.
I agree.
Very proactive, you know.
I agree.
And I think that's the most interesting way to do it, I think, rather than waiting for somebody to come bestow their, you know, authority.
Yeah.
It is a case though. I know, I don't know, when I'm popping around, checking links through various blogs, even, you know, you go to a gallery and there does seem in some shows to have remarkable cohesiveness, you know, that each piece is interrelating, and not that there should be an exact number, but just say 10 pieces are being shown, and sometimes they almost look so interrelated, like that it's surprising. And so I did think there is a perception, you know, because when you do click on these and it can be a very good gallery, and you see that remarkable cohesiveness, that you feel you should be producing a body of work that is as cohesive if you're going to get a show.
It's the edit. It's the edit, Kevin. It's the edit.
Yeah.
I feel like my studio, you could walk in and it's the edit. It's what you decide to like pull out and position in a space with something else. It's totally the edit. I can't stress that enough. I think, you know, I know that I talk about research, and I think it's important to be aware of your position within this ecosystem. I think that's really important as artists to understand their position within the ecosystem, but don't lose sight of the primary function, which is to make the art, right? Like, it's sometimes that becomes to me, too much energy. It's focused on that, on you not focus, you know, on other things other than the primary function for you within the ecosystem. The primary function for me in the ecosystem is to make good work.
Well,
like
it almost becomes, you know, worrying about what other people think you should be making and not what you really should be making, right? And,
And I think when we had, you know, when we first had our gallery, it was a very small space, and that was kind of perfect because a lot of the artists we were showing, they were doing their first show, their first solo show ever. And so we could hand over this room, and it was big enough to say, show a body of work, like put together a show. And we really deferred to the artist to say, put together the show that you want to put together. We'll, you know, like we definitely had opinions, but we really wanted the artist to say, oh, okay, like this is the first time I'm able to have my work seen in relationship to other works that I've made. And so it was really exciting to see how artists did that, and everybody did it differently. But it was a small enough space, and it was, you know, under the radar enough that there wasn't a lot of pressure, but people took it seriously. And I think that's why the gallery lasted and grew, is that when you give people, you know, the license to do what they really want to do, then they do it well, and they take it seriously, and they don't feel so much pressure to produce for other people. That they really, you know, put their heart into it, and that shows.
And I'll co-sign that. I'll co-sign that. Like, no matter
Yeah.
if it's a big show or a small show, you take it seriously
Hmm.
and you put your heart into it, because
Yeah.
you never know who's going to see it. And as someone who does, like, installation and works with sculpture, you don't really know how that space is going to react or how you're going to feel about that space until you actually put it in it.
Mhm.
And I've gotten better because I've put my all into a space, regardless of whether it was going to be high traffic or low traffic, high risk or whatever. And it taught me so much space, so that when I'm in a situation that I may personally be like, oh my gosh, this is a big opportunity, that I'm not going to fumble because I've been here before. I understand some of the logistical things that may have held me up in the past. So
Um,
that's another thing. Like, if you're going to do it like you
Right.
mean it. Don't phone it in ever, because you
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
never know.
Um, again, between both of you, just so many great quotes and great insights, and that aspect of pouring the heart in, no matter how big the show, is just so critical for all those reasons. Do either of you have any more tips on studio, like when you get a studio visit, Anina, or Sam, if you still do studio visits, any more tips to help someone prepare for a studio visit? You've already given some great tips, but other insights?
Anina, do you want
Yeah, sure, I can go.
to?
I have a whole routine. To be honest, I have a
Okay.
whole routine for studio visits.
Hmm.
If I'm asked for a studio visit, I usually want to know how. Like, sometimes that's like why, um or where they heard of me from, or if it,
Hmm.
like, sometimes it's not through me actually meeting the person they want to do a studio visit. Sometimes it's they're reaching out because they saw my work in a collector's home or something like that. So I like to know where the connection came from, like if they saw my work somewhere and that's why they want to do a studio visit, or um that's really important to me to know in the conversation
Mhm.
initially. Then from there, I usually do a little background check. Like, if you said you, yeah, I mean, it's real.
No, of course.
I also want to put out there, like, woman, I have my studio space. Like, there's also a level of like being safe, right?
Yeah.
Like, anybody email you tell you they want to come to your studio, don't mean they get to come to your studio. Like, that's not, you don't do
Mhm.
that with your home, right? Like, you don't just be like, oh, some person emailed me and they want to come over on Saturday, so I'm just going to open my front door. So I tend to do a little background check.
Mhm.
However they came to discover my work, will usually lead me to start the background check. So if
Mhm.
it's from someone, then like, or a collector, then I'm like, oh, okay, this is how you found this. And then I want to know a little bit about you before you come to my studio, to be honest. It just can't be some random name.
Mhm.
And if it is a name I don't know, I need to know a little bit about it. Um, and then after I do a little bit of a background check, that informs like how I want the studio visit to go a little bit, or kind of what would be the best experience for that person, right? Because all studio visits aren't going to be commercial engagements. All studio visits aren't going to be, I mean, there's just so many different reasons
Right,
why a
right.
person would want to do a studio visit. And so having a little bit more insight about why they're asking you to do a studio visit, who they are, helps you to prepare for it to be a productive studio visit.
Right.
And as I alluded to earlier, my studio time is precious.
Yeah,
And
so
so I'm giving you
protect that bubble.
time.
Right.
Yeah, I'm giving you time. And they usually, for me, in my experience, studio visits aren't short. They're at least an hour.
Mhm.
And so that's real time. And there's real time in preparing the space for that hour, because everything can't be out.
Mhm.
Everything doesn't lend itself to people coming in, especially if you have a small studio like I do in New York City. It's like sometimes you got to move things around, put things
Mhm.
away, clean it, right? Like, you might be able
Right.
to work with the floor not being mopped for 2 days, but you don't want to have somebody in your studio that the floor isn't mopped for a few days. So you want to clean it. This is all time taking
Yeah.
away from you actually making work. I always believe in a clean space. Um, I always have refreshments because, again, I don't know how long it's going to go. Um, And I also think about what I would want to get from the studio visit because it has to be mutual. Like
Yeah.
in my head, if I'm going to put this much effort in, you're going to put some effort in. We should have a mutual exchange that leaves us both like that was an experience we kind of like gained something from.
Yeah.
So most times I have questions already that I would like to know from the person to talk about in relation to my work. I use it as an opportunity to gain information sometimes, like as a little preview or to like what I'm doing, to engage in conversation in that way. And sometimes I use it for career advice,
Mm.
you know. But again, it's like knowing what I want from it before they arrive, doing that work. And then also when they leave, making sure that I follow up in some way. Doesn't mean like, oh, I'm going to see you again necessarily, but just concluding that. And I usually send like an email, or sometimes if we're like talking about something that's coming up, making sure they get an invite to it or they're included on the mailing list is how I kind of conclude what I would say is a studio visit cycle. So like you reach out, we do the research, we set up, we do it, we meet, and then there's some kind of like follow up.
Yeah.
For me. That's how I usually handle a studio visit.
Well, those are fabulous tips. And now Sam knows exactly how to prepare for your students.
I mean, I do a ton of studio visits.
You
I
do.
try to do studio visits every week.
Wow.
And it's all different. And like I kind of alluded to earlier, like I don't love the idea that there's any kind of power dynamic
Mhm.
in a studio visit. I try to go into a studio for whatever reason I'm going. As Anina said, it's a very personal space. It's a very important kind of I don't know, not to put religiosity on it or something,
Right.
but it's like a sacred space. You know, it's
Right.
where you're making your work, and your work is your whole kind of self. So I always try to enter a studio with a lot of respect, and I feel kind of as a guest. Um, and at the same time, I will say that I love a messy studio. I love a studio where I can really see like
No,
how this.
Rajan, you don't want this play on your pants.
And I've seen some really messy studios. I've also seen some very tidy studios, but you know, I like to really see how an artist is working in there, and the more I see, the better. I say that, but I also do think editing is really important when you have a studio visit, like to kind of have a sense, like I go in with an open mind, and I may have an idea of why I'm going to that studio. You know, I might have a project in mind. I might just have seen this person's work in some shows and like their work and wanted to learn more. Um, I rarely go into a studio with with a plan to say like, okay, this studio visit, if it goes this way, I'm going to say this. You know, I really want to see where it goes. And there are people who I've been doing studio visits with for 20 years on a regular
Wow.
basis, and they've never shown at my gallery. They are people who I love and respect and love their work and love talking about their work, but there are a million different factors go into what actually ends up in our gallery. Um, and likewise, there are people I've known for 20 years really closely, and I see them at the gallery all the time. And just recently I went to a studio with someone I've known for over 20 years, and I'd never been to their studio before. We
Wow.
talk all the time. We talk about their work. We talk about my work. We talk about what's going on. And one day we were like, oh, hey, like we could actually meet up in your studio sometime and talk in front of your work, and that would be really interesting. And it was great to kind of, after all those years, to actually stand in front of a piece and talk about it in a different way. So I think I approach studio visits differently in a million different ways, and I just love the conversation that happens, and wherever it may lead or not lead in terms of working together. I always think it's a valuable um, interaction. And I learn so much from the way artists talk about their work, and hopefully they learn a bit too about the way I respond to their work.
Excellent. And a question came in from one of the attendees and asked, can you speak about submitting work to calls for artists? Do either of you have experience in that?
I have experience in that. I submitted my work when I first moved to New York to a call for artists, and I got into a really nice show. And I have to say that I met some of the artists that I now work with at the gallery in that show.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, it was an open call to show my work. It was one of the few times I ever actually showed artwork that I made in New York. And it was a wonderful experience because it was a big group show in Chelsea, and I still have great friendships that came out of that experience. I think there are red flags to look out for in open calls. I think any open call that asks you to pay anything to show your work or even submit your work should really be questioned. I mean, I'm not saying across the board it's not a good idea, but I do worry a lot about things that pose as opportunities that are really preying on artists to pay their own way. So I find knowing what you're applying to or knowing what you're submitting to is important, because you don't want to be, artists are, especially at the beginning of your career, it's a very vulnerable position because you're putting yourself out there. And I think, you know, there are things to look out for.
Yeah.
So I think an open call can be great. I had a great experience, but I think
Yeah.
there are some that are to be avoided.
Yeah, I agree. I won't say that I've always been in a position where I don't do the pay to play, but knowing what you're applying for is really, really important. Um, you know, there's so many different ways to get your work shown. So I don't want to say never do it. I usually don't pay for applications or calls. I've done it in the past if I thought like a curator, I wanted to see the work, or it was like an institutional thing that I thought I wanted to participate in. But again, I mean, nowadays you can email and ask them to waive it, you know. So the fee is not the biggest deterrent for me. I just want to put that out there. The biggest deterrent for me is when they ask me to pay for shipping the work to them. That's one that's kind of like a flag for me. And the other is if there's no mention of it being insured, which has happened, you know, where the work isn't insured. And especially if it's like something that you know you won't make it to the opening, or it's not something that you could personally deliver your work. And this is again speaking from someone who makes three-dimensional objects. Those are red flags for me because I'm trusting you with this work. And there has to be some kind of baseline for care. That's really where I put it. Like there has to be some kind of baseline for care. So fees, not so much. But I definitely I see a lot of I know a lot of friends when we were first like getting out here trying to get our work out there, and it was like, oh, we can show at this place, but we're responsible for the insurance, or we have to ship the work. And I don't I don't think that's a good practice. I think those are red flags for me.
You know, Anina, one of the things I was going to mention this evening, and the question that just came in was the perfect segue, is several years ago when we were at the Mass MoCA and there was a ceramic show, and I saw this work, like, oh my goodness, it's Anina! You know, it was so incredibly, it was just thrilling to see your work there. And the question that came in was, for Anina, what steps did you take to build relationships with museums or other institutions?
The people, you have to be, it's like the relationships I have with people. You know, and also, so the people is one, we've talked about that a lot. But I think the other part of the equation is the timeline. I think a lot of people think that you meet a person today and somehow tomorrow you're in some show with them. And it just doesn't work that way. It's actually years.
Wow.
Like it's years. And so that's why I said make sure the relationships are genuine, because I mean, who has time to fake being friends with somebody or faking a relationship for years? Like that's a lot. So you know, it takes years and you have no idea how it's gonna manifest. You know, the Mass MoCA show was like all of the other shows, like even the institutional shows that are coming up, like relationships I have with institutions that have collected my work, those have all come from people that I knew that did like studio visits that I didn't even know at the time if they were even associated with some of the institutions. So, like, for example, I'm in MFA Boston collection. Well, the curator that kind of suggested that my work be collected, we did a studio visit like 4 years before that. We did
Wow.
one. And I've just been keeping them up to date of what I've been doing. Hey, I have a show over here. Hey, I have a show over here. And I'm not asking for them to respond. I'm just making sure that they've received the information. So emails were going out, but they weren't writing back like, oh, Anina, thanks for inviting me. I can't make it or anything like that. It was just like, just letting them know. And then years later, they said, hey, you up to the board to be collected. Like, that's how it happened.
Wow.
And that came well before my first gallery show.
Wow.
Right? Like, that came before the gallery show. By the time the gallery show came around, they were like, oh, we can go to the gallery show and see some more pieces. But we have already visited Anina's studio. And I got introduced to that curator before they worked at MFA Boston by a friend who met them in grad school.
Right.
So it's like, you just never
Right.
know. Like, but we had and they were like, oh, we want to come see the work. And so I say that to say that you never know how things are going to manifest. And so if you meet somebody who's working in the creative field, in the arts, and you just naturally tend to have some things in common, then you kind of nurture them, you maintain that. And it definitely takes you to new opportunities. Almost every opportunity on my resume, I could tell you how I met that person and how that person met another person. And it turned up being a phone call like, hey, we thinking about doing this new thing. Does that sound like something you'd be interested in? And then I was like, I don't know, but let me see if it is. Just being open to it. And then it led to something else. So I think that's like part of it for me.
And people move around a lot. I mean, I think, the longer you're in this, creative world, the more you realize that, somebody who is, the front desk person at a gallery right now might be a curator at the MFA.
Right.
And here, people are getting jobs to put themselves through their PhD programs or and the art handler who hung your piece in that group show might be a really cool artist who you could develop a relationship with, who might, and I feel like people change hats all the time. I mean, I think about, so many instances where things almost happen and you get so disappointed that they didn't happen, but that person who was, maybe making that opportunity happen that didn't happen, they're going to go on to something else, and they're going to remember that didn't happen, and they want to make it happen. So it might happen somewhere bigger and better, and it might be a better opportunity. So I feel like that kind of, time is like really, people move around, their jobs change, their roles change, artists become curators become artists, collectors become museum directors, like everybody is constantly shifting. We all wear a lot of different hats. Anina might be, showing her work somewhere, but somebody might invite her to curate a show,
Or my friend might ask me to help install a show. I'm going. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's so many opportunities
and I think
to be a part.
Like you were saying, and like being really genuine with people and not constantly looking over their shoulder to see who is behind them, who might be more important, like really giving people the time to develop an interest in you and for you to develop an interest in them. That's really what it's all about in terms of creating a community. It's like a big spider web or something where you just build out all of these connections, and then Anina's spider web collides with my spider web, and
I mean, I've gone to see shows with curators. Like, they're like, oh, the show's opening tonight. Are you going? Yeah, I'm going. Okay, we're going.
Right.
And that has nothing to do with my work, but I'm going with them because we're both interested in this particular show.
Right. Could I ask Sam, related though to this, I've known gallerists who some of the time are really trying to place work or get the attention of museums and institutions to buy the work from the gallery. And I've seen it a little bit as it gives further clout to the gallery that artists they're representing now have been purchased by this institution. Do you have experience in that? And is it a case that gallerists themselves or back to the network are networking into the museum through the artists as well?
I mean, I think it happens in a million different ways, and I think there are some curators who have really great relationships with gallerists and are really keyed into, a gallery's program, and that's how they discover an artist. I think there are other curators who really don't pay any attention to commercial galleries and really only want to have relationships with artists. And I feel like we live in a time, I mean, I guess it's always been the history of the art world that the museum is sort of like the pinnacle of bestowing some sort of significance on the work and saying,
Right.
okay, this is now in a museum collection. It's going to be cared for long, for all of history, and
Right.
it's accessible to the public. But it doesn't happen in one way. Like Anina said, a friend of hers ended up being, someone who did a studio visit with her ended up being a curator at an institution that said, like, even before she ever had a gallery show. And I know a lot of artists who have sold their work directly to museums. Some artists that I work with sold their work directly to museums before I started working with them. Other artists, we sell their work to the museum. But it doesn't happen in one kind of systematic way.
Right. There's not one route.
Yeah.
So two more questions came in, and then I have one more question. I think that will round out the program because we, with the time. So the question is, when talking about your works while making a connection at a gallery, for instance, is it good or bad? Is it a good or bad idea to show people photos of your work on a cell phone? I found that showing works on a phone sometimes feels very hasty and unprofessional, but meanwhile, it is kind of hard to just use language which can feel like a pitch, like you're pitching yourself and not as appealing, as opposed, I think, to showing work, which is, here's the work. Can you share thoughts on this? Thanks.
I mean, I think looking at work on a cell phone is always difficult. I mean, I think it's the problem with.
I don't do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think for all of the benefits of, I do think Instagram is a very useful tool. But I do think when someone says like, oh, can I show you my work? I think like, well, that's not really showing me your work. That's showing me your phone. And I guess what I prefer in that situation is someone saying, can I send you my work in an email? I know earlier I said like the cold emails, they all get deleted. What doesn't get deleted is if someone asks if they can send you their work and I say yes, which I usually will say like, yes, you can send me your work. Then I'll definitely take a look at it. But I do think the kind of, it can feel a little bit like a bombardment to have somebody shove their phone in your face and say, like, look at this, especially when you really don't know what you're looking at.
Yeah. I think it's also intuitive to think through this. Like, I see the question and I'm not, like, for me, I would, like, did they ask to see the work? Because, like, I get it. You're talking about the work. So one of the tips I would say is you should always have words to talk about your work. Like, you should always have them. Practice it, but not pitchy, just words that you could like talk to your grandmother or a kid about your work. Like, just have those words. And I, as a sculptor, it's really hard for me to be like, yeah, let me show you these pictures because it's never the same as what you experience in real life. So I've actually never had anybody, a few times I've had people ask to see photos of work. And I usually, ask to, like look at my website or send it. But that's a perfect opportunity if you're having a good rapport with somebody to be like, oh yeah, you could look at some of it on my website, or we could organize a studio visit. Boom. Like, I mean, like, it's just like to see it in person. Or if your work is up somewhere, to tell them about where they could see it on their own time, in person. So that those are kind of how I have worked through those situations.
Right.
But I kind of let them lead. I am not the big, again, I don't cold call, but like I kind of let the person lead to which way they're comfortable with viewing
Mhm.
my work
I,
in some ways. Like
Oh,
they
yeah.
prompt me.
I
yeah,
think
no,
Anita said before about keeping people, keeping people posted on when you are showing, when you do have things happening. Like
Mhm.
no one minds getting, like people talk about, oh, I get so many emails about, spam this and spam that, but if I have an interest in you and we've had a nice conversation, then I don't mind getting an email being like, hey, by the way, I have work up in Chelsea right now. Like if you're
Yeah.
in the neighborhood, go
Right.
check it out.
Yeah.
When you start hounding people and saying like hey, did you go check my workout yet? Like have you gone, then it's
Right.
like, and it's not really okay. But keeping people, you should definitely, I think the best thing for an artist to do when their work is up is tell people,
Yeah.
go see it.
Yeah.
What do they say? Read the room.
Right.
And
Definitely.
yeah,
Read the room.
but Anina, I have to say, I just love the thought that you should have words as well, because I think many artists don't think in that zone and the importance of it and the value of it that it can lead to other things. So it's such a
And
great
you don't have to be like pitchy. You could just be
Right.
like, this is what I'm working on right now, and I'm excited
Right.
because the thing is doing this. Like it doesn't have
Right.
to be pitchy. It just has to be, you should have some words. We speak.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
So a few final words. The one more question is, do you have any tips for approaching a gallery for internships?
I'll leave that to Sam.
um, it's funny. We've had a handful of interns over the years, but we always joke that we're not organized enough to have interns. And I think that I did internships when I was a student, and I don't think I did any internships after I graduated. But when I was a student, I did a couple of internships. PS1 was one. So there are places that, really have internships available, and they can be they can be things you have to apply for, or they can be people that you just reach out to and say like, hey, I want to do an internship, do you have anything available? And we've had interns who have come from kind of out of nowhere and came into the gallery and seemed like eager to help out, and that's great. I do think if you're applying for internships, you should have a resume to send along. I don't think anybody's going to say, well, never say never, but I think a good tool for getting an internship is a resume that literally just says like, I'm a senior at RISD in painting. I got this award and I worked at H&M last summer. And, like, I think that that's all legit information. I mean, I know people who always look for people who have restaurant experience to work at their gallery because they have a certain sense of how to manage things.
Right. Right.
So I think a resume is really, really helpful in reaching out for internships. And I do think, in some ways, those are actually the cold emails that I pay more attention to, is people saying like, hey, do you have anything that I could help out with? We also have a pretty strict policy at the gallery that we only do paid internships. So sometimes it's just
Right.
not something we're, looking to do, is, bring on somebody that we have to feed and pay.
Right.
But sometimes we are. So I think it really,
Yeah.
it doesn't hurt to put yourself out there and say like, oh, I'd love to even if it's one day a week or something. And I think it's really good for artists to see what a gallery is like from the inside. It might not be anything that you're interested in, and it might be, the most horrifying experience for you to see
Right.
this side of things, but it might be really interesting. And I think that a lot of really great artists that I know and work with have experience working at galleries because they kind of understand like both sides of where people are coming from.
Right. So the final question to conclude the program, saving it for last, tips, advice, or insights on pricing work. The $1 million question.
I'm curious.
But for everybody, it's an issue.
Oof.
How have you approached that, Anina?
I actually don't have an approach right now.
Okay.
Sorry.
No,
I don't
that's
have an approach right now. I can tell you how I got to where I am right now, because my peers have asked me. And when I first had the opportunity to sell my work, um, I talked to the gallery about what they thought we should price the work at.
Right.
And that was a conversation we had. And it was like a little experiment, right? We showed the work for the first time. It was at a particular price point. It was successful with that price point. And then we thought about raising it after a certain point when we had established like a few museum collections or we were, doing the solo show. And for me, it always took into consideration, we didn't talk about it in numbers, but whatever numbers we were like floating around always took into consideration, um, you know, what it took for me to invest to make the work. Like I say this all the time, like when I'm making a solo show, that's all front investment on my end, for the most part, to produce that work. And so I've always felt like I needed to feel that the numbers put me in a position to be able to make more work. Like I can't be crippled after or an engagement. So I always felt comfortable with the way we talked about pricing with my gallery partners that I have. And then institutional collections kind of took me to a particular like raise in price. Um, and I was pretty happy with that. So we kind of like settled there for a bit. And I'd like to say we kind of stayed there. And I'm still comfortable with that. But recent recognitions, like prizes that I've won in the last like couple months, and even the recent one being nominated, like those have all brought back like, okay, are we still at the right price point? And I think it also took into consideration something that I hold dear, and I don't think all artists think this way, and there's nothing wrong if you don't feel this way. But the way I feel about my work is that each piece is unique and a certain amount of energy goes into each one. And I know this sounds cliche, but it's so true because I can't reproduce any of my work verbatim if I wanted to. Like it's a chemical reaction that's happening. And because that is the case, I when I make a piece, that's really it. Like that's it. Like it ain't
Right.
coming back. You're not gonna ever see something that kind of like does the exact same thing. I can't refabricate it, like
Right.
even if I wanted to. Um, so for me, that meant, how do I want to approach and how do I view my work? And I don't want to make a lot of work. I'm not, I like, I want to be prolific and I want to make work in the sense that I'm continuously making work, but I'm not trying to, let's just say I'm not trying to have like 2 solo shows every year or like,
Right.
even a solo show every year. Like I'm trying to have purposeful, intentful and work that when you have it, you feel like this is it, I don't know. I joke. I shouldn't make jokes like this with my gallery partner, but I'm always like, you just never know. What if this is the last piece I ever make? Like, like that's the kind of precious energy I
Yeah,
put
that's
behind my work, you know? So, that's where I've managed to come with the pricing. And I've been fortunate enough that pricing has held weight as I've done other showing engagements and, gain recognition. I don't believe in like raising the price tremendously quickly. I think it should be purposeful and the result of something. So like, if I've been doing this for like 10 years or whatever, and it seems like this is a good time to increase, that makes sense to me, but not just arbitrarily because the market says so or because I'm popular. That's not kind of how we've worked around pricing.
Thank you, Nina. And
Yeah.
Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that Anina just said is really spot on, because I think first of all, if you're not working with a gallery, like if you're pricing your work yourself and selling it, I think the most important thing is to feel good about selling your work, is to name a price that you're actually going to feel like you've gotten from that sale some benefit and some kind of satisfaction from saying, like Anina said, like, you know, a lot of people, you know, they make one thing and that's it. Like the next thing's going to be different. You can never get that one thing back. So you don't want to be in a situation where you sold it and you kind of feel like, oh, I kind of wish I hadn't done that. I wish I'd held on to it. So I think feeling good about a price and being honest with yourself about what is going to make you feel good. I know, you know, when I was first starting out and showing my work, I sold a couple of pieces for really cheap because I think I didn't value them myself in a way. Like I didn't think other people would value them. So I was like, oh, whatever, like just sell it for super cheap. And the work sold and I felt kind of bad about it actually. And that was a real lesson for me in now that I work with artists and I help them price their work. I never want an artist to be like, oh, great, you sold that. Like, thanks. You know, like I want them to feel like celebratory for having sold a work and having it go into a collection, and maybe it helps them pay their studio rent, and sometimes it pays their whole studio rent. You know, like it can be. You want it to feel good. So I think that's the first thing. Then I also agree with building prices in a really sustainable way. I think a lot of people, and I think there are some galleries out there that will say like, oh, you know, you're in the MoMA collection now, so like your price is just, you know, quadrupled, and that's not necessarily a sustainable way of approaching a market. You know, hopefully you're going to be an artist for the next 50 years when you're starting out. So you don't want to start out being like, my work is worth this much and there's no, you know, discussion. That's that. You really have to be realistic about what's going to sustain you over time.
When I looked at pricing my work, like the prices that were suggested to me, I also looked at peers and similar work, like mediums, the you know what they were doing, their credentials, and tried to align myself in some ways with them. You know what I mean? Like what they're selling their work for, what was working, what was successful. So it wasn't like we picked numbers out of our head. We really looked at like what, you know, I've been out of school this many years. I'm working in this way. I'm working towards this. Like those, looking at other artists who are operating in the same fashion also helped with those numbers.
That's where those relationships are
right.
important when you do. I mean, we do it as a gallery all the time where we turn to other galleries that we're close with and we say like, what's going on, and you're like, how are you pricing this artist, because we have sort of an artist in the same place. And if you're not working with a gallery who does that for you, then being able to turn to other artists and saying the same thing basically is incredibly helpful.
Your oldest work is your most valuable work, y'all. I think about that all the time. When you said like you sold your work and you were like really disappointed because you were like, you didn't value it. So like, I think working on your own internal value system is almost like, is really important in this industry. A lot of people are going to tell you what your work is worth.
Totally.
Anina, Sam, thank you so much for providing a very beautiful, insightful, genuine discussion on the range of questions we had. I love it. I love hearing these perspectives, and it's also very I don't know, it's positive news in a realm of some icky news lately. So just to hear that relationship building, being genuine, knowing your own internal value system. I mean, all of these things are just really empowering and really terrific. So just great thanks to both of you.
Thanks
Thank you
for having us.